Hi, Natasha Davis from Because You Can. I wanted to talk a little bit about vulnerability because it's something that we hear a lot about as coaches. It's something that we hear a lot about when it comes to sharing online, and how vulnerability can be a magnet, how vulnerability can attract people. So I wanted to talk about this a little bit more because what I notice is that it's not quite as simple as vulnerability. And actually, vulnerability there are subtleties within it. So it sounds interesting, doesn't it? So I've been thinking about this a lot lately. I've been seeing things around this subject a lot. So when we talk about vulnerability, for me, there are subtleties within it, and it's more about your intention. So intention is a big word, I think, that's important in this. So when we share, I see lots of people sharing their stories, their situations. They share about their life with different intentions. And for me, that's the key, really, is the intention. So, for example, if someone is sharing their story with no kind of intention of getting something back for themselves, so it's about giving, receiving, getting, all of these things. So if someone is sharing their story with the intention of with no intention for themselves to receive anything, but sharing their story from an authentic place. So authenticity is another one. Authentic place. Just to share it with no kind of attachment to any outcome of what might happen, of things they might receive because they've shared their story, but they share it because they want to share it. Maybe they hope that it might be of assistance to someone else. Maybe they hope that other people will have some kind of insight, and maybe they hope that it will attract certain people because they share that story. Yeah, and that's like kind of, for me, that's when it's like a magnet. That's when it's like, but you don't even have the intention of attracting people. You just share your story because you share your story. So I wrote a blog once. It was when I was setting up my women's group. I wrote a blog once, and I had lots of people contact me because I wrote that blog. It was about my story. I was sharing my story. I had no intention of kind of attracting people for that. I just thought this would make a good blog. This is my story. Maybe other people will identify with it, but I'm going to share it and kind of throw it out into the world and just see what happens. And that is when it creates magic. Vulnerability creates magic. Vulnerability is like a magnet. It attracts people. What I also see is the other side of the coin. I see this in my other business, really. I see people sharing their story, sharing their situation with the intention, really, of kind of getting something. Yeah. So that's the other side. So for me, that doesn't seem authentic. It has some intention of getting something, receiving something. It's, if you ask, when they don't get that something, then sometimes people react differently as well. So it's like, if I share my story with no intention and I be vulnerable to put that out into the world, if nobody is attracted to that story, it doesn't matter. I was just sharing my story. My intention was to just share my story. And I think that's what makes it so powerful, is that you don't expect anything. But from the other side of the coin, when people share their stories and their circumstances, and it's kind of like sometimes they share their excuses as well. Okay, they expect something. When it doesn't happen, maybe they don't get what they were expecting, then it's not like they're not just like they don't let it go. They kind of react to that, and it's a bit like the ego comes in a little bit sometimes. So this is the difference. I think people can share their stories. I see people sharing their stories all of the time, and I'm not judging people if they're at that point. What I'm saying is that I see there is a difference, yeah, and it's not just about vulnerability or being vulnerable with your story. It's about the intention behind it. It's about the authenticity behind it, because the people that share their story to get something, and then when they don't get it, the ego comes into play. Sometimes they will get what they want in the short term. I think in the short term it works for them, but I think in the longer term it doesn't. So I see this from my perspective. Yeah. When people share things with no intention of getting anything, when they are vulnerable and they share their story from that authentic place of kind of just sharing it but not expecting anything in return, they tend to get what they want. This is just, it tends to work. So without them wanting it to, or needing it to, which is another word that is important. Because when you share your story with the intention of getting something, you need it, right? You may be coming from a place of lack. You need it. When you share your story with the intention of just sharing your story, you're in abundance. You're not in need. You don't need it. You're just authentically sharing your story. You're also probably coming from a place of love. You're not worried about if people judge your story. When you put your story out there and you are vulnerable, you also put yourself out there to criticism, other people's opinions, all of those things. But when you're authentically sharing your story, that doesn't matter, yeah, because that's your story. Nobody else can really comment on that anyway. That's your perspective. You've been through that experience. Those people may not have, or they may have been through their own experience, which is different. So you kind of understand that, and you just put it out there anyway. On the other side of the coin, when you are in lack and in need, and you share your story and your circumstances because you need an outcome, and then when you don't get it, the ego comes into play, then this is coming from a different place. So you're needing that outcome, and a few times out of how many times you asked, you'll get it, but it'll only work in the short term, and in the long term, it won't, because what I see as well is the people asking for stuff, sharing their story, wanting an outcome, not getting it, and then the ego comes into play. They don't get on very well with other people. They get bad feedback, on different sites and stuff like that. So they may be coming from a place of fear as well. They don't want criticism, but they get criticism. They get bad feedback because of where they're coming from. So whenever you are being vulnerable, whenever you are sharing your story, whether it is something that is your past experience that you want to share, whether it is just telling some of your day's not going very well, whether it's just saying, my story yesterday was that I had to pick my son up from school, he cut his head, I had to take him to the hospital, and I've just kind of sent someone a message now and say sorry for the delay, but I had to pick my son up yesterday, take him to the hospital, he had a small cut on his head, so this is why I'm late in messaging you. I could have messaged them yesterday, but I had to do something before I messaged them, and I wanted to do that today because I had that to deal with yesterday. So this was my story, but I shared that little piece of information just really to explain why my message was late, not expecting anything from it, but that person may relate to that in some way. If they have small children, they may well do. And this is the point. I'm not sharing my story to get something in return. Okay? I'm not saying, can you do this thing because I've had to do this? You know, I'm not asking someone else to do something because of my story. And that's the difference. So I hope that video was useful to you. It's just that I've been kind of noticing, I see a lot about people talking about vulnerability online, about being vulnerable, about being magnetic, and I think some people don't get what that means, but it is about sharing your story, your experience with, and it's a story, it's your story, it's your experience really. It's not your excuses, it's your experience, and it's how maybe your excuses are part of it, but it's how you dealt with them and how you kind of move forward. So there's a kind of, you know, process. It's just how you're looking at the process of it, I suppose, because you're looking at it from a different perspective now, aren't you? You're looking at, when I shared my story, I'm looking at it from where I am today and about my story from before. So when you think about being vulnerable, when you think about sharing your story, authenticity, intention, just get it out there, with no attachment to any outcome. And you know what, if nobody likes it, if nobody contacts you because of it, if nobody says, wow, I feel like that too, you got it out there, and that is good. So that is it. And you know, you may not attract someone today. You know, I put things out there and don't get anything for weeks sometimes. Patience. Someone, you know, sometimes people see things and think, wow, that's amazing, and don't tell you. And you'll run into them and they'll go, wow, I really like that. But you never would have known because they didn't say anything at the time. So just put things out there without any need or intention of getting anything in return. There you go.